Taladu did not know her own mother had already destroyed her. Palace ground was pure chaos. Royal guards had Taladu pinned to the earth, her clay pot shattered beside her. The crowd of Zangura was screaming. Royal seer Meccano stood over the broken pieces, eyes white as bone, declaring that the sacred bloodline of Zangura had been violated. Taladu was sobbing, clawing at the ground, screaming that she knew nothing. And her mother Halwa was standing at the back of that crowd, completely silent. Not crying, not fighting for her daughter, just watching. If you are new here, subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because what this mother did to her own daughter and what the ancestors did in return is something you will not see coming. Do not move. The kingdom of Zangura sat on red earth older than memory. Baobab trees lined the palace roads. Praise singers filled the morning air. The king was aging and the harvest moon was 3 days away. A bride had to be chosen for Prince Badamasi before the moon turned full. Royal drummers rode through every village carrying the announcement: every eligible maiden must prepare a meal. Whoever pleased the prince would wear the crown of Zangura. But there was one law older than the feast itself. The royal bloodline was sacred. Any abomination committed against it would not go unanswered, not by man and not by the ancestors. Taladu heard the announcement from the doorway of a crumbling mud hut at the edge of the village. She was 20 years old, slender, with careful eyes and hands that were never still. She was the kind of girl people looked past in a crowd, not because she was ordinary, but because she never made noise about who she was. Her mother Halwa heard the announcement differently. "You are going to that feast," Halwa said, grabbing Taladu's wrist before the drumbeats had even faded. "Mama, we have nothing to cook with," Taladu said quietly. "I said leave that to me." Halwa had been chasing status her entire life, and it had always moved just out of reach. Now it was 3 days away and she could almost taste it. That night while Taladu slept, Halwa wrapped a cloth around her shoulders and walked alone into the dark market at the edge of Zangura. She stopped at a stall most people pretended not to see, a woman with hollow eyes and a low voice who knew things she should not have known. The woman leaned close and whispered the instruction. Halwa did not flinch. She nodded once and walked home. What she did next in the quiet of that hut while her daughter lay sleeping was something the ancestors of Zangura had no name for. She took Taladu's used sanitary cloth from the rubbish corner, squeezed its contents into the soup pot and covered it carefully. Then she sat in the dark and waited for morning. Taladu woke to the smell of soup and smiled. "It smells good, Mama." Halwa said nothing. She just looked at her daughter and said, "Go, and do not come back without a crown." Taladu balanced the clay pot on her head and walked toward the palace in the early morning light, completely unaware that her own mother had just aimed something deadly directly at her. What was waiting for her at that palace was something neither of them could have predicted. The royal compound was alive with color and competition. Maidens arrived in fine wrappers with rare spices and elaborate presentations. Rakia, the wealthy merchant's daughter, walked in like she had already won head high, attendants behind her, a pot that reportedly contained ingredients from 3 different markets. Prince Badamasi moved down the line slowly. He was tall and quiet with the kind of face that gave nothing away easily. He tasted one dish after another, too salty, too eager, too rehearsed. He looked tired, like a man going through tradition rather than searching for something real. Then he reached Taladu. She was kneeling on the ground, no fine wrapper, no attendants, just a simple clay pot and 2 trembling hands. He almost walked past her, then something made him stop. He looked at her for a moment. She kept her eyes down. He lifted the lid of her pot. The aroma rose slowly. He tasted once, paused. His expression shifted into something nobody in that compound had seen all afternoon. He sat down on the nearest stool and finished the entire bowl. The compound erupted. Women ululated. The king leaned forward on his throne, smiling. Rakia's grip tightened around her own pot until her knuckles changed color. The king rose to speak. Then Meccano rose from the far corner. His staff struck the ground once, twice, 3 times. Every sound died. If this story is gripping you, drop a comment below. I read every single one. Meccano walked to the center of the compound slowly, eyes shut, lips moving without sound. The crowd split to let him through. He stopped over Taladu's broken clay pot and opened his eyes. They were white, completely white. "Something forbidden has entered the walls of this palace," he said. "The ancestors are not watching today. They are turned away." That night Prince Badamasi's fever came without warning. One moment he was standing, the next he was burning from the inside, trembling, speaking words that made no sense, eyes unseeing. The palace healers tried everything. Nothing worked. Then the signs came. The river near the palace turned the color of dark mud before sunrise. The king's prized white horse knelt on the palace ground and refused to rise. And at midnight, a red wind moved through the compound, not a storm, not a breeze, a deliberate, warm, furious wind that pulled torches from their holders as it passed. Zangura was terrified. Talatu was seized from her sleeping mat before dawn and dragged before the throne. She arrived barefoot, wrapper half tied, tears already falling. The king looked down at her with outrage. That was worse than rage. "Zangura has never executed an innocent person," he said quietly. "But Zangura has never allowed an abomination to go unanswered either. Meccano, find the truth. Stay with me, because what the ancestors were about to reveal in that compound would change everything about this story." Meccano performed the rite of truth in total silence. He poured black seeds into a clay bowl and burned them slowly. The smoke rose thin and searching, moving like it had a destination. The crowd watched without breathing. The smoke passed over Talatu without stopping. It traveled across the compound. People stepped back as it moved through them. It crossed the open ground, climbed the air, and stopped directly over Hawa. The crowd turned. Hawa took one step back. "Hand that cooked the darkness is standing among you," Meccano said. Hawa screamed that it was lies. She pushed through the crowd, trying to move away. 2 guards caught her arms. She fought them. She called Meccano a fraud. She called the ancestors liars. Then the burning seeds cracked 3 times in the clay bowl, sharp, loud, final. Hawa folded onto the ground and wept. She confessed everything. The midnight market, the hollow-eyed woman, what she had done while her daughter slept. The compound went silent in a way that felt like grief. Talatu stood across from her mother and said nothing. She did not scream. She did not collapse. She just looked at the woman who had carried her, raised her, and then chosen a dark shortcut over her daughter's life, and she was silent in a way that was louder than anything she could have said. Rakia stood at the edge of the crowd with quiet satisfaction spreading across her face. Thinking the crown had just fallen into her hands, she thought too soon. Prince Badamasi was carried out on a simple wooden seat, still weak, still feverish, but his eyes were clear and his voice was steady. He asked his father for permission to speak. The king nodded. Badamasi looked at Talatu across the compound for a long moment. Then he turned to his father. 14 days before this feast," he said, "I rode through the outer village at dawn. The rain was heavy. I saw a girl moving through the mud carrying a water pot not to her own home, to the hut of old blind Malama Rabbi at the end of the road. She did not rush. She did not complain. She set the pot down, bowed to the old woman, and walked back into the rain with an empty vessel. Compound was completely still. I stopped my horse and watched her. She never looked up. She never noticed me. I asked my guard her name." Badamasi paused. He said, "Nobody important. A poor girl from the edge of the village. Her name is Talatu." He looked at his father again. "I had already made my decision that morning. The feast was just tradition." Meccano stood slowly. "The river spirit Serwa placed her on his path 14 days ago. What Hawa did was not just an abomination against the throne. It was an act committed against a girl the ancestors had already chosen. That is why Zangura shook." Rakia left the compound quietly. No crown, no prince, no victory, just the sound of her own footsteps. Hawa was escorted to the kingdom gates the following morning. No shouting, no drama, just royal drums and silence as the gates of Zangura closed behind her. The 7-day cleansing ritual began. The river cleared on the 4th day. The white horse rose on the 5th. The red wind never returned. On the 7th day, Talatu was bathed and robed in deep indigo cloth, the color reserved for Zangura royalty. She was brought before the full kingdom. The king stood, looked at her for a long moment, then did something that made the crowd gasp. He lowered himself briefly in the ancestral bow reserved only for those the spirits themselves had endorsed. Then he placed the crown on her head. The kingdom of Zangura erupted. Badamasi took her hand as she rose. He leaned close and said quietly, "I saw you in the rain when you thought no one was watching." Talatu looked at him, and for the first time since any of this began, she smiled. Hawa spent her whole life reaching for something through darkness, and it swallowed her whole. Talatu never reached for anything. She simply carried water in the rain for a blind woman who had nothing to offer her. And the ancestors watched. They remembered. And when the time came, they made sure the whole kingdom of Zangura saw exactly who she was. In Zangura, they do not say the ancestors are watching. They say the ancestors are keeping record. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more African kingdom stories. I will see you in the next one.